It is Wednesday afternoon, and this is when I do my Facebook Lives and my Instagram Lives, and I'm here to give you guys some great information today on early rising. Okay, so we had the time change. It's been several weeks, and if there's gonna be problems with early rising, this is when it happens. And so I wanted to take a moment to review with you what early rising is, what the triggers are, and how you can manage it, and also provide you some additional information that will help you monitor everything going forward. Okay, so what is early rising? In the world of sleep science, early rising is defined as a waking between 4 and 6 a.m. And typically that waking is where the child is wide awake and wants to start their day, or they're wide awake and it becomes impossible for it becomes very difficult for you to help them go back to sleep. The problem with early rising is that once it starts and you start seeing it once or twice a week, you'll notice that it will start picking up pace and it starts to build a life of its own and a momentum of its own, and then you find yourself in a daily dilemma of early rising behavior. And that's why once it starts, it's super important to kind of step back and evaluate what the triggers are. Because if we can manage the daytime triggers, then we can help unwind the new behavior so that it doesn't get embedded. Because once it gets embedded, it becomes much more stubborn to resolve. Okay. So again, this time change that we had can sometimes trigger early rising. And so if you're going to be seeing it, you're going to be seeing it right now. And if it's happening, then this is for you. All right. So let's talk about what the triggers are for early rising. Okay. There are 4 triggers. The first trigger is if your child's bedtime is too late. Okay, I'm going to explain each of these triggers and I'm going to go back and give more details. The second trigger is if your child is not getting enough daytime sleep. So the third trigger is if you are putting your child down too drowsy, or if you're putting your child down already asleep. And the fourth trigger is that if the interval between afternoon nap and the time they fall asleep at bedtime is too long. Okay, so there are 4 triggers, and I'm now going to break down each trigger individually so that you can see how they tie together. So let's talk about what does it mean to have bedtime too late. This is directly related to that 4th trigger I just mentioned, which is the interval between afternoon nap and when your child is asleep at bedtime. All right. So right now you might have what appears to be a perfectly appropriate bedtime, 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock. However, if your child is having early rising, even though that bedtime used to work well for them in the past, it might be an indicator that the bedtime is now too late for them. And too late could literally be like 10 minutes too late, 15 minutes too late. Okay. And it relates to this concept between afternoon nap wake up and falling asleep at bedtime. So for a lot of kids, what will happen is that the nap wake up remains around the same, but it might be taking them longer to actually fall asleep at the onset of sleep at bedtime, therefore making their bedtime too late for them. Or it is possible that their nap has changed, meaning they're sleeping less during the day, and therefore the interval between waking up and bedtime is now too long, or that the amount of daytime sleep has diminished, therefore triggering the early rising. So you can see how these are all interrelated, which is why it can be such a stubborn and difficult dilemma for families, because we have to look at every element of what's going on in the daytime shift to determine where this is accidentally getting triggered. The other thing that you have to look for is, what are you doing at the time that the early rising happens? If by accident you've been allowing your child to get up and get exposed to light and have food before 6 a.m., then that is another way that the behavior, unfortunately, is getting triggered. So what happens to a lot of families is they, again, it starts slow, like 2 or 3 times a week, and like, oh, they woke up at 5:30, 2 or 3 times a week. I just, let them come into my bed and snuggle with me, or I let them come into my bed and watch a show on the iPad while I kind of rolled around and got my day started. And even though those are perfectly normal and natural responses, when it starts happening 2 days a week, then it's 3 days a week, then it's 4 days a week, then now you are embedding the behavior in your response to the early rising event. And that's what makes this so hard, you guys. So listen, this is a no judgment zone. Okay. I myself have many times had an early riser in my household. And I know all this stuff, and I know what to be looking for. I know how to make sure I don't have the triggers. I know how to make sure not to embed the behavior by responding inappropriately at the time of the event. And it still can happen. It's so hard. So I'm talking to you about this because I have tremendous empathy if you are struggling with early rising. Okay. So the dilemma, in order to get out of this, is I always recommend families that are experiencing it, before you jump into action, is to really start sleep logging again. I really want to know, what time is your child waking up in the morning? When are they going down for their naps? What are you doing to and for them at the onset of sleep for those naps? When are they waking up? How long was the sleep? Did they wake up happy and restored, or did they wake up cranky? Right? And then looking at that second nap or the third nap if you have a younger child, and then getting really, really focused on what is happening from the minute they wake up from that last nap to the time they're falling asleep, not getting ready to go to sleep, not trying to fall asleep, but asleep, and looking at that interval and making sure it's not too long, and maybe even too long by 10 minutes. And then looking at the amount of daytime sleep they had that day. So here's the other thing you need to know about early rising. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So let's say you are really trying to manage this and you're watching very carefully the daytime triggers. And let's say you had a perfect day of naps. You really nailed the sleep window. You know you got the right intervals. And then sure enough, that next morning you have early rising yet again. That's what makes it so hard. In order to manage this, you have to be relentless in managing the daytime triggers and attending appropriately to your child during the daytime shift, or when attending appropriately to them at the moment that it happens, in order for those two things to happen consistently day after day after day before the behavior will loosen up and start to resolve itself. That's what makes it so hard. Because you can be doing everything right and it can still be occurring, and then a week or two later it finally dissipates if you are managing it appropriately. So that's the other realistic thing I want you to know, is that it's not quickly solved. It takes a lot of effort before you see results. It's kind of like a diet, right? You could be eating well and exercising every day for 1 or 2 weeks before you even see yourself losing 1 or 2 pounds. It's the same kind of feeling. It's relentless attention to detail, and then it will loosen up. So I'm going to put here in the chat my Sleep Manners, Get Your Ages and Stages sleep line, because one of the key things that we need to know is, okay, if one of the triggers is daytime sleep expectations, and the intervals between nap cycles and the intervals between nap and bedtime are important, then I need to know what's appropriate for my child's age and stage. And this is what this wonderful Ages and Stages sleep guidelines document will provide for you, so that you can at least have a foundation on what to be working for. So I hope that this has been helpful and beneficial to you to be thinking about the early rising behavior. you know, if you are in a situation where you're like, okay, it's happening, I've been trying to manage it and I'm not having any success, well, then sometimes it, you know, becomes important to talk to a professional because, you know, like I said, this thing can be really tricky. And sometimes we need to just get in there and just investigate it from a variety of angles. And of course, that's where, you know, talking to a sleep expert would be really helpful. So I'm going to put here in the chat also how to reach out if you want to schedule time to talk with me. I offer 45-minute sleep strategy sessions where it's a Zoom video where it's you, me, and your partner, and you fill out a form in advance so that I'm coming to the conversation already prepared to help you. And I do a lot of my sleep sleuthing, and then I give you an action plan, and you can usually walk away and tackle this early rising behavior. So I hope you guys have a great day, and let me know early rising in the chat, or if you just recently solved it, or if you're still struggling, so that I can be of support to you. All right, take care. Have a great day.